Hi, this is Rahman Sheikh. Welcome to Fortnightly Railway Transportation Systems podcast. I am the host and railway systems specialist working in this industry for 24 years and counting. This podcast is primarily focused on railway experts who have vast amount of experience and contributed greatly to this amazing industry. This is not a technical seminar but focuses on feel good stories, individual journeys, their success and failures, motivating younger generation to kickstart their career in railways and creating a sense of pride for the railway people who devoted their lives on the most environment friendly public transportation. Welcome to today's episode of our Railway Transportation Systems podcast. We are thrilled to have with us Gabriel McGowan, Executive Director, Engineering, Design and Assurance at Sydney Metro, a seasoned professional with over 2 decades of experience in the rail industry. Gabriel's career has taken him across the globe from the United Kingdom to New Zealand, Malaysia, and now Australia. He has an extensive background in maintenance, construction, and design with both the public and private sectors, giving him a unique perspective on the challenges and opportunities in the rail industry. Throughout his career, Gabriel has evolved from leading projects to shaping strategic approaches for transport markets and clients. He is deeply committed to delivering on sustainable development commitments and is known for his problem-solving skills, ensuring that every project has the right capabilities and the people to achieve optimal outcomes. Join us as we delve into Gabriel's journey, explore his insights on the rail industry, and discuss the future of railway transportation. Hi, Gabe. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Rahman. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the first question, Gabe. Your personal and career background and also your career journey. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started in the rail industry, including your impressive career spanning multiple countries, as I said in my intro?
Absolutely. So it really kind of stemmed back the kind of journey getting into rail and engineering more broadly was I didn't really know where I was going when I was younger. I think that's very similar to a lot of young people. I actually studied mathematical physics back at university, which after about a year I realized was quite an abstract subject and wasn't going to be something that I could continue with for the remainder of my degree. So I changed over to mechanical engineering, which I thought was more kind of tangible and practical, which drove the kind of first step towards rail. And when I got to the end of my degree, there was a lot of talk, this is back in like 98, 99, of a need for engineers in the rail industry, and specifically London Underground had a graduate training program. I was studying up at Edinburgh University, so from London originally, keen to go back to my home city. So kind of stumbled towards the rail industry in that way and applied and got onto the graduate training program. I can remember still kind of looking through a brochure. There was track engineering, there was rolling stock. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree, and they were very keen to get more mechanical engineers in the track space. I think for London Underground, it was primarily to do with the wheel rail interface issues they were facing. So I could have gone two ways. I could have gone rolling stock and I could have gone track, and I kind of like chose something. It resonated in a way, who knows? And that was the path took me towards rail and track engineering. Stayed with London Underground on a brilliant graduate training program, which unfortunately I think in the industry there's not enough level of this broad experience. You know, when you work in an organisation as broad as that network, I think maybe Sydney Metro, where I am now and where we are, provides that same level of exposure from all the way through the asset life cycle. More and more as the industry becomes fragmented, to get that broad experience is very difficult. So that was good training, very much focused of getting chartered, exposure to all aspects from maintenance to manufacturing, sometimes with turnout manufacturing. And then after a while, I did some work on the Victoria Line upgrade project, and then moved to Actel, who are working on what's now HSR1, high-speed rail, a Channel Tunnel rail connection. Channel Tunnel Rail Link. Worked on that for a while, then West Coast Main Line, construction, so kind of moving around where the big projects were in the UK, and got to a point where the projects were moving further and further afield from London. And I thought, well, maybe now's the time to spread my wings a little bit and experience some international projects. So that got me to the point of throwing my CV out there to Australia and New Zealand. And New Zealand got back to me, the what's now called Kiwi Rail. It was called On Track at the time, and went over there as a project engineer. Had a brilliant time. They gave me a 4-wheel drive, and I got to drive all around the central region that I was responsible for, and took the opportunity to travel around what's an absolutely stunning country. Not a significant pipeline back then, so I was drawn to Australia, and then moved to consultancy with a company called Sinclair Knight Mers in Sydney, and was based there for quite a while. Went through the transition to Jacobs, then took the opportunity to work in Malaysia on Klang Valley MRT Line 2, which was a great project experience. Different challenges working in that environment. We're not as an established rail industry, so relying very much on international support to deliver that project, and came back and moved into business development. So, a different part of the asset lifecycle, kind of winning work, and Arup for about 6 years. And now I'm with City Metro. So it's been an interesting journey. It's taken me around the place and given me the opportunity to work at different stages of the asset life cycle.
Wow, what a journey, Gabe. And I think we are very glad to have you in Sydney Metro. In all your talk, I think I pick on transition and challenges. Let's talk about that. What were some of the major challenges you faced when transitioning between different countries and roles within the rail industry, especially your career evolution? Because how did your roles, especially when you said that you worked in maintenance, construction and design, how do you think it influenced your approach to leading projects and strategic planning?
Yeah, good question. I was kind of like looking at my career, kind of going backwards through the asset life cycle. I started at maintenance, then moved to construction, then moved to design, then moved to business development. So kind of winning the work. You usually kind of win the work, you design the work, you construct the work, and you maintain the work and operate the work. But I think the benefit of having some time in all of those phases of the asset life cycle enables you to appreciate some of the different challenges that are faced. I spent quite a while in consultancy and design. And, when you're designing things in a model environment, you're looking at, sub-millimeter accuracy of things. The reality is, what can you actually pick up on site from a survey? What can you construct? And when you see things from an asset maintenance perspective, you're inheriting a lot of what others have delivered, and you look at things from a different perspective. So being able to bring that experience of the challenges of maintaining assets in when you're looking at things from a design perspective is important, I think, as well as construction. So by the time I was a designer and working on some significant rail design projects as a consultant, I'd already spent some time in maintenance and construction and appreciated the challenges dealing with designs, implementing designs on site that maybe you don't always get if you've gone straight into design. So I think having that experience definitely helped me appreciating maybe the pragmatism that's needed in some spaces.
And it helps us as well because you share your knowledge, not just in the project and parts like this. I got one simple follow-up question. What's the difference between asset lifecycle versus project lifecycle?
So I suppose, when you look at an asset, you've got to look at it for the whole duration of the asset. And the asset only really becomes live to an extent where you're starting to build it. These are the very early stages. You might be at a stage where part of it's built. You still need to take care of that asset. It's not fully commissioned, it's not handed over commission, but you might need to take some level of responsibility of that asset. And then obviously when it's commissioned, it's in service. And then you've got the operations and maintenance of the asset and then decommissioning of the asset. The project lifecycle could start well before then at some very early feasibility or needs analysis to determine from a business case perspective, the asset hasn't actually been created at that stage. So, I suppose that's pre-asset existence. And so there's an overlap. You could have a project that's only on one particular phase of the asset life cycle. It could be a project during operations and maintenance. You might have projects looking at improvements of existing assets. So that, the project life cycle could be only one stage, one part of that whole spectrum across the asset life cycle.
Wow, great answer, Gabe. I really loved it. I learned something new today. Let's go on to your industry insights and experiences, especially the project challenges you have faced. From your extensive experience, which you just shared with us, what are some unique challenges you have encountered in rail projects in different regions?
Yeah, every time I've moved, there's always been a stage that you have to kind of take a step back because you haven't worked in that particular geography or region. And that can be because, obviously in Australia, we have states and they have different standards and they even have different gauges and all the wonderful challenges that brings. But every time I've moved to a different geography, there's always that kind of discovery stage of trying to understand the nuanced differences. It could be standards. It could be the expectations, for example, from a design perspective, what's expected to be delivered in terms of the level of detail within documentation. That can vary from region to region. The complexities around stakeholders, different geographies have different government structures, different stakeholders, different tiers of review that you wouldn't necessarily be privy to if you hadn't worked in that jurisdiction before. So understanding that is really important, as well as the maturity within the market. So some markets are not as mature, they haven't delivered as many projects of that type, let's say, and so their supply chain hasn't developed to a level of maturity where suppliers and everyone else through that supply chain is able to support it in the same manner. So understanding that means you've got a better appreciation where the risks lie. And then as an individual, what you need to make sure that you're covering off in whatever role you're doing. So it could be I revert back to designing, understanding the client's expectations and standards and approaches, level of detail, whether it's design reports and whether it's drawings, models. More and more, I think we've seen a consistency across different jurisdictions. And when you look at projects, let's say, for example, in the metro space where we both are, there tends to be a consistency because of it being GOA4, consistency in terms of how you approach the project, and usually a consistency in terms of the level of detail that's being delivered. So that helps if you move from one metro project to another. But I've worked on freight projects, heavy haul projects, high speed, fast rail. Each one has a slightly different nuance in terms of what's important for that project. Some of it's grounded around more established technology, so it's pretty much more straightforward. Other ones, again, if you look at Metro and introducing for City Metro, the first GOA for railway in Australia, when it's at its first, you're right at the front of something that's never been delivered. So the whole market isn't at that same level of maturity.
Wow, great answer, Gabe. Moreover, from your intro, you said you were on both sides, that is on the client side as well as the contractor side. So that is, you worked in both the sectors, that is public and private sectors. How do the challenges and approaches differ when working on rail projects in the public sector compared to private sector?
Yeah, good question. The private sector obviously has different drivers and priorities. Primarily got a different commercial focus, depending on the structure of the organization. It could be floated, it's shareholders and stakeholders and equity investors that might drive a particular approach. Certainly, if you ask most people, I think they say the private sector is very much focused on cost. Public sector, in the railway, when you've got organizations like Metro that are looking right from early stage business case through delivery to operations and maintenance as the asset custodian over that whole period. It's a far longer perspective that they have to take, and private companies come in at particular stages. They don't necessarily engage through that full spectrum of the life cycle. So I think when you look at public sector organizations in the rail space that are predominantly around operations and maintenance as well as delivery, they have to take that perspective of long term. They have to consider the legacy of what's being delivered. The critique sometimes on private sector is that they don't necessarily do that. I think that's probably unfair. I think working in the private sector, more and more organizations really understand the importance of considering all those aspects, and it forms an important part of how you deliver. Certainly from a safety and design perspective, you have to consider, here is a piece of asset, we are designing and delivering it maybe in a D&C environment. We have to consider the safety risks associated with when it's being constructed as well as when it's being operated and maintained. But you have to bring in that expertise. You may have some level of expertise internally as a private sector organization, but you predominantly need to bring that expertise from those stakeholders that might be in the public sector. So I think it's very much an opportunity in most cases to be a partnership between public and private. That doesn't necessarily mean a PPP, but it means that the private sector have a space to play in the delivery of these projects and sometimes in the operations and maintenance of these projects. And the public sector has to lean in and utilize that capability as and when needed.
Great answer, Gabe. One quick follow-up question. Outside in the market, there is a rumor that the public sector are more focused on governance and due diligence and less technical. Do you agree with that?
I think can see where that comes up. I started in the public sector back in London Underground. I've been more experienced in the time I've been with Sydney Metro, which has only been a short period, but certainly seeing the level of governance that's necessary. And I think it's safe to say, until you've worked within it, you don't necessarily appreciate that level of governance and the need for that, and it can have that perception externally for those that aren't as close to it to see a very bureaucratic process. I think it's always a criticism in government-led organisations that the level of bureaucracy can be very challenging. I'm always focused of looking at how can we ensure that we provide the right level of due diligence and follow the right governance, but do it at the right pace. So, we don't want to slow things down, but we do need to ensure that we've undertaken the right level of consultation with the broad spectrum of stakeholders. And obviously, large infrastructure projects have significant interest given their cost, given the risk in terms of program and cost delays, and the perception for the public. A lot of people are interested. I mean, if you look at Sydney Metro right now, it's just been announced that city section will be opening sometime in August. There's a lot of interest in that, focus from the public and government and everyone else. So we need to make sure that we follow the right steps. So it's a challenge, but it's one that we're all working to ensure that we do it efficiently. But I think that's where that crops up from.
Yeah, I do agree with that, Gabe. And let's talk more about technological advancements as well, because technical side, I'm really keen in it and I love it. Let's bring your engineering brain and I'll tackle that. How has technology changed the rail industry since you started? And what advancements do you see as most promising for the future?
So I was reflecting on this the other day because I was having conversations with colleagues around digital engineering. And when I started designing, and scarily enough, I realized that was probably around 20 years ago in the track space. That was utilizing tools like MX Rail or early versions of AutoCAD that had a level of programming. So there was a user interface that you could develop some of these alignments through, but it also used Genio files, the kind of program files that you loaded up for designing alignments. And so it was quite a clunky method. It took me a while to appreciate how to utilize the tool efficiently. Technology has moved dramatically over those last 20 years. That's obvious to most people. Within the design space, we've now got far more intuitive systems and levels of automation that makes it a lot easier to design. And that's not only in the kind of two-dimensional space, three-dimensional space has moved on dramatically. Things like BIM modeling is now at a level that's quite staggering in terms of what it can produce and the level of detail that has helped dramatically stakeholders appreciate what the product's going to look like. And in the past, it was predominantly 2D drawings, on paper to PDF to the 3D space. So from my own experience designing in Permanent Way and Track, there has been a progression that's been brilliant. I mean, it's made life a lot easier. It's been a lot more efficient. It's been easier to interface with other disciplines. The exchange of information, there was, at the beginning, people were using different models. There was an argument, I can remember, which design package was going to be used on this project. And if you hadn't used the other design package, you were limited. But now things could be federated a lot easier. And the interfacing between packages is a lot simpler. So it's easier to design overall, and the level of automation has made life a lot easier. So it's not to say I'm like an old designer saying, it's easier than when I was a kid designing, but this can only improve how we deliver projects and identify risks and close those out in a lot more efficient manner. So that's been the most significant increase, as well as how data has been captured. So I think in my field, obviously, there's designing with survey input. So in the past, there'd probably, a level of traditional surveying, surveying methods, which is now kind of migrated to things like LiDAR and cloud point scans. That means you can capture everything in one visit to a site and process that capture of information to what's absolutely needed from a design perspective. And it's made it a lot safer. Yeah. So in the past, people were having to be in the rail corridor, physically doing survey, long traverse distances. Now you can set up scanning equipment at a number of points and capture absolutely everything to the point that it looks like a photograph, a 3D model already, which is brilliant.
Another question, quick one. What's the difference between flathead rail and bullhead rail, and why is it so hard for signaling persons adjusting axle counters with these two type of rails?
And when I first started the railway, there was bullhead rail all over the place, and a flat bottom rail was kind of a bit of a new section. But bullhead rail has existed from the very beginning. It's obviously doesn't have the same level of stability because it doesn't have the foot of the rail, but is useful in terms of transposing rail where you can and turn it over. So that was a benefit back in the day. Rail sections have improved and axle loads have increased. Most railways have moved over to flat bottom rail and different sections depending on the axle load. So as the axle load goes up, or there'd be questions on durability of the rail head for a number of things, whether it's kind of wear or cracking, the rail head section increases as well. So different sections are used, which may not be directly relatable to the axle load. So if you look at metro systems, they use a rail section that other railways would use for higher axle loads. But there's a number of factors that come into play. It's the supply chain. If you don't really want to have lots of different sections on a railway, you want consistency and what's available in the market. And there's possibly the benefit from your own discipline in terms of attaching equipment when you've got a better height of a rail with axle cancers and the like. So that might have answered your question.
It does. What I see is you love problem solving. As a problem solver at heart, can you walk us through a process for identifying and addressing issues on project?
So the way I approach most things in kind of the rail environment in problem solving is that the beauty of the railway is that it is so multidisciplinary, so complex in a very confined corridor. And so whenever you're looking at any challenge of resolving an interface problem, let's say, and with track, a lot of interfacing disciplines are set out from the track and driven by its alignment and location, is that you need to really appreciate to a certain extent those adjacent disciplines to get their perspective of what the challenges are. And that can be applied more broadly across any problem within the railway. You need to understand the adjacent interfaces, whether they're contractors, whether they're internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. Until you've appreciated that landscape, it's very difficult to dive into the solution. The risk can be that you kind of immediately jump to looking at a solution that suits your own discipline and resolving that, and not really being cognizant of the impact to adjacent disciplines. And if you apply that from a design perspective, again, it could be any challenge that you have, a problem-solving perspective of the need to appreciate adjacent stakeholders, interfaces, to develop that picture so that when you're looking at solutions, you've considered the impact to those, because it doesn't matter what it is, and certainly more so in the railway than maybe others, particular solution for a discipline. Let's take for example, track. If you said, design me a track alignment from A to B, the obvious one would just be a straight line. You can go as fast as you like, but obviously you can't really charge through whole suburbs and people's houses. Even when it's underground, you have to consider basements and other constraints. So there's always going to be a compromise that you have to take. And that goes across the board for most disciplines. You don't want to compromise on safety, so there's safety critical aspects, but in most cases you can adjust, and each discipline will have to adjust to a certain degree, whether it's compromising on things like speed, journey time, other aspects because of other constraints. So we're always dealing with constraints and interfaces, and to solve those problems, you have to get that broad perspective before diving into it.
Wow, great insights, Gabe. Really learning a lot from you today, and thanks for sharing your knowledge on this board. I'm clubbing a question, a leadership and strategic planning. As I read out in your intro that you're very keen on skills and people, how would you describe your leadership style, and how do you ensure your team is equipped with the right skills and people for optimal project outcomes, and especially what strategies do you employ to connect these capabilities and ensuring people successful project delivery, etc.?
All right, there's a lot in there. I'll have a go.
Yeah.
So leadership style, I've been on a few training programs that enable me to kind of think who I am and how I approach my style of leadership, which I think is important for anyone leading teams. I like to think that I'm empathetic. I think it's important when you're leading people to, as they say, lead below the surface. So not a kind of surface approach of niceties or thinking you're doing the right thing, but really understand the people you're leading. Diversity is brilliant at Sydney Metro. We've got people from very diverse backgrounds across a number of fronts, and I think it's important and beholden to leaders to really understand those people and where they're coming from, because it's easier to be able to support them in their careers and identify areas where they might need support. I think another approach I take is trying to be authentic. I think it's important to really lead from being who you are. So it's important to turn up in an authentic manner, be true to yourself, sometimes as you move up in organizations, you might feel an expectation that you have to be a particular person or follow particular traits. I think you've got to trust when you've progressed through your career that what's got you there has been no small part of who you are. So I think it's important to be that authentic leader. And we touched on it earlier. I like to try and be pragmatic in my approach of leading and managing. So I think a lot of the time with the complexities in engineering, you can get lost a little bit with challenge and pull between different aspects and disciplines and overlay of safety and requirements. That means it's difficult sometimes to cut through on what's needed to ensure that you get the right outcome. And, again, I talked about compromise. You need that level of pragmatism to get things done. It can be difficult without that. You can get caught up in all sorts of processes and procedures and everything slows down. So without pragmatism, I think you'll be challenged to get things done. We all have to take a balanced approach in these things. Again, it's not about compromising on safety. For example, I did a paper that I presented at the ARA on the interface between track and signaling and the overlay on safety processes and misalignment and understanding between the two disciplines. And you've got to identified again to me the need to be pragmatic in how you approach things, working with adjacent disciplines to be able to make decisions that are efficient and quick. Otherwise, you get bogged down in too many things. Again, I would touch on a little bit of the empathy, but also understanding people's strengths. I think it's important, more focus on people's strengths. People talk about weaknesses, but I think there's been a fair few studies done on yes, okay, people want to address their weaknesses, but lean into your strengths. That's the important thing. And a lot of people, everyone has good strengths. I think understanding when you're looking at putting projects together and teams together and people's in positions, it's really ensuring that you're giving people the opportunity to play to their strengths. And that comes from identifying what the needs of a project or a team are so that people can operate as best they can within those roles, and where that potential sits is really important as well. So giving people opportunities to step up. I'm a strong believer in mentoring and coaching and support, and it's something that we all benefit from, irrespective of what position you are in any organization. That identifying talent and supporting talent is really important, and opportunity to grow. So if I reflect on kind of my career, the opportunities given to me has meant that I've been able to take a risk, push myself out of a comfort zone and kick on to that next level. And that's because others around me have had trust in me and seen potential and give me that opportunity. And I think that's important, that when you're a leader and manage people, that you look for that and give people the right opportunity with the right support around them. They know they can take risks and they've got a fallback safety net to support them.
Great answer, Gabe. One more quick one. Future challenges. How do you see, or what do you see as the biggest challenges facing in the rail industry in the next decade?
I think there's probably two aspects. The rail industry has maybe sat on its laurels a little bit when it comes to sustainability. So because it's more of a sustainable transport mode than air or car, for example, that we've been able to kind of stick out our chest and say, look, we're a sustainable transport mode. However, there is significant embedded carbon in the projects we deliver. And we'll always need more transport networks. They may change in the future in terms of the type of mode, the level of automation, the finer details. If we look 50, 100 years from now, who knows what rail will look like. But it requires infrastructure, and infrastructure has a significant carbon footprint when it comes to the embedded carbon. Maybe the operational carbon footprint isn't as bad as other transport modes, but that's where we need to lean into. Obviously, sustainability is an extremely important focus area for us as an industry, but more broadly, when I say industry, the infrastructure industry, but more broadly, globally, and we've got to do our bit. And every industry incrementally needs to improve. That will help overall the challenge we have when it comes to decarbonising the planet in our different regions. So I think that's one particular focus that we need to move in, and that's looking at how we can utilise materials better. It's taking a circular economy approach in terms of reusing, recycling, repurposing, those kind of aspects that we need to consider when we're designing railways and considering how they might be used in the future. And then the other challenge, I think, is probably going to be in the digital automation space. So the level of automation has been great, but then we've got to kind of think of what impact does that have on the workforce? How do we need to adapt and change to a future that might have far more increased levels of automation. And we've seen it in some particular industries where would have been done by a number of people that just isn't necessary anymore. And I think that's probably one of the challenges that we need to consider as an industry of how we support our workforce as automation increases in certain areas. And we've talked about digitalization of design, and what would have taken a lot longer, it takes a lot less time. There's processes that have been automated that means you don't need as many people. So our workforce will be at a point in that journey, and we need to support them as they might need to transition to other areas. So I think those two things, sustainability and automation, is probably going to be the biggest challenges we've got to face.
Wow, great insights, Gab, because you actually covered these challenges are not just for transportation industry. You covered every single industry, and I think these challenges are for everyone. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Before I let you go, the final thoughts. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners about your journey, the rail industry, or the future projects, etc.?
I suppose, referencing some of the stuff that's cropped up, I think one of the things that I just advise on is adaptation, something that we have to do irrespective of what kind of discipline background we are in. And I was having a conversation with a colleague about this the other day on understand when you look at your career, you may focus in on a particular area and become a deep subject matter expert in that space, but you're always having to adapt anyway. You're having to adapt because technology changes. We just touched on that. But also, as your career changes and you may move up within organizations, you've got to understand how to adapt and appreciate what you might need to let go that served you particularly well to get to a point. And I was using the analogy of getting from one shore to the other, the story of someone, you get a boat and you travel from one side of the lake to the other. That's part of your journey. When you get to the other side, you don't put the boat on your back and carry on walking. You leave the boat there. It served the purpose. It got you to that particular point, and then you needed to move on. And I think humans and engineers are always adapting. They're always adapting because the world's adapting. It's probably changing at such a fast pace now. It's getting faster and faster because of these disruptors, if you like. Then those are the kind of focuses I think most people need to consider of how do I need to change to be able to operate in this space? What do I need to let go of? And what do I need to lean into? Because what served me well at a particular point doesn't necessarily serve me well or as best as it could going forward.
Wow, great insights. I really learned a lot, and I strongly believe the people listening to you will have a great takeaways from this pod. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rahman. It's a pleasure.
I believe everyone listening to this podcast has got something to take away from today's discussion. If you like this podcast, please listen, follow, and share this podcast within your network. If you believe we should be sharing your story or someone within your network, there is a railway leader who should be here sharing his or her contribution to this industry, contact me on railwaytransportationsystems@gmail.com. Thank you for your time today. See you next fortnight. Until then, stay safe and take care of yourself.